the gift of a second chance, the transplant breakthroughs that are changing lives.
I said, oh, hey, Mum, hypothetically, if you could have a hysterectomy and I could have your uterus and go on to have another baby, would you do it?
Do you feel different with someone else's penis?
The only way I can explain it to you is like, it's mine.
How has the use of DCD hearts revolutionised cardiac transplantation?
There's about 8,000 heart transplants performed per year. DCD could add 2,000 heart transplants to that number.
We could have sent Bill to the grave with his organs intact, or we send him to the grave and he's helping someone else.
Lolita, at 14 you were suffering pain in your abdomen and you went to the doctor. What were you told?
The first appointment, it ended up with 3 doctors in the room telling me that I needed keyhole surgery. So when I woke up from that one, I had a doctor sitting in the end of in the bed and with a piece of paper and a pen and drawing different ways the ovary can look like, a uterus. And I asked him how my uterus looked like, and he said, you don't have any.
What was your reaction to that news at 14 that you didn't have a uterus?
Devastating. It broke me. And I ended up feeling disgusted. I didn't know if I was a boy or a girl. I felt like a freak. I got into a depression, a deep one, and I tried to get help, but nobody could help me because they never heard about it.
What upset you most about not having a womb?
I always loved babies. I always wanted to be a young mom. So that was so devastating that I would never be able to carry my own child, and that I didn't know what I was, if I was a boy or a girl.
Linda, you're Lolita's older sister.
Yeah.
What did you say to her back then, given how distressed she was?
When she came back from the hospital, I just said, like, you know what, you can have mine.
You can have my uterus?
Yeah.
At that point, was giving her your uterus a possibility?
No, it wasn't.
Lolita, years later, you were diagnosed with a rare syndrome known as MRKH.
Yes.
What is that?
That is a syndrome that means that you are born without a uterus.
How did you learn that a uterine transplant might actually be a reality?
My mom saw a news article in the newspaper one day that there was this professor, Mats Brännström, was going to start trying. And that was back in 1999. So I called him, and he couldn't say that much because it was just in the beginning. And then in 2011, there was a new article in the newspaper and said, okay, we're ready to try it now on people, on human beings. I found an email to his secretary, and I emailed her and asked her what do I need to do to get a uterus. And she emailed me back a few hours later and said, you have an appointment in September. Wow. And this was in the beginning of the summer.
Wow. Linda, nearly 20 years after you'd promised to give your sister your womb, were you still willing to do that?
Yes. Yes.
Wow.
I was.
Why?
Because when Lolita was diagnosed with this syndrome back in '94, it was real devastating for her, and she was the one that should be a mother, not me. She was the one who loved children, not me, and I ended up with 4 kids. So it was hard. It was really hard for us. That it was for me as older sister as well to look at her, and because I couldn't help her, I couldn't comfort her, I couldn't do anything.
Lolita, 10 years ago, you became the 4th woman in the world to receive a uterus transplant and the first to receive a uterus from their sister. Yeah. What did that transplant mean to you?
Everything. Everything. It made me everything. I had a chance to be a woman, to be just like the girl next to me.
Kirsty, how do you feel listening to Lolita and Linda's story?
I'm incredibly grateful that Lolita and her sister put their hands up and gave it a chance, because if Lolita and her sister didn't try, then the team in Australia wouldn't have looked over to Mats and his clinical trial, and I wouldn't have had the chance to have my transplant. So, yeah, I'm incredibly grateful.
This was Dr. Mats Brännström, who pioneered the procedure and was Lolita's doctor.
Yeah.
In 2021, you gave birth to your first child. What happened?
I had a very long labour, and which led into a tricky caesarean section, which then I had a postpartum hemorrhage, which resulted in me losing 11 litres of blood. So I lost my entire body weight of blood twice over. And the surgeons decided to do a life-saving hysterectomy to stop the bleeding. So they removed my uterus.
Michelle, you're Kirsty's mother. What do you remember about that day?
We were excited because we were going to get a grandbaby, and then we knew that she was going for a C-section, and then we heard nothing after that. So I knew something wasn't quite right.
And when you learnt that she'd had to have this emergency surgery, removing her uterus essentially, how did that sit with you?
Oh, I was devastated. I just knew how much Kirsty wanted to be a mother, and how she wanted a few children, and, you know, she always did everything right and everything that everyone asked of her, so I was devastated.
Kirsty, what was it like learning that you wouldn't be able to carry another pregnancy?
I understood what they were telling me before they put me under. When they told me that I would need a life-saving hysterectomy, I protested. I said no. And I asked for my mum, and I asked for my husband, and then I asked to be put to sleep because I didn't want to be awake anymore. And then I woke up in ICU. They brought my daughter in. I got to breastfeed her. I'll put her at the breast. And pretty quickly, people wanted to reassure me that you still have your ovaries, you still have your eggs, you'll be able to have biological children, but obviously I wasn't going to be able to carry another pregnancy. I learnt very quickly that you can feel two things at once. So I felt incredibly grateful that I had this gorgeous, amazing little baby girl, and I had the support from all my friends and family, but I was really, really aching, and I knew that, yeah, I wanted to carry another pregnancy.
What did you do next?
Someone posted in the Hysterectomies Facebook group about the clinical trial, and from that day on, 6 months postpartum, I was like a dog with a bone. I shot off an email straight away, and I rang and made an appointment with my GP, and then I remembered that I should probably ring my mum and speak to her too, because to be a part of the clinical trial, I was obviously going to need a donor.
Who did you think might become your donor?
There wasn't too much thought behind it. I immediately rang my mum and I said, "Oh, hey mum, I've been doing some research. I'd like to be part of a clinical trial. Hypothetically, if you could have a hysterectomy and I could have your uterus and go on to have another baby, would you do it?" And she paused for a moment and said, "Yeah, sure. Yep, sure, no worries. What do I have to do?" And I said, "Oh no, it's all here in Australia and we'd have to go to Sydney and there's lots of things to do, but I've already submitted my referral, so I just needed to know that you're in for it too." And she said, "Oh, no worries, I'll talk to your dad. Yep, that sounds okay."
Michelle, do you remember that call? Like, what did you say?
I sure do. Yeah, when she came to me, I sort of thought, was that a thing? I have never heard of anything. Obviously, I've heard of transplants, but not a uterus. And I said, sure, let's look into it.
Rebecca, you observed uterine transplants in Sweden and you're conducting a trial into the procedure in Australia. Why is it still considered experimental?
We've only done in the world less than 80. So I think until you have an established pathway for knowing that a procedure is safe and then you can make it available. So until it's in that, under the treatment option, it's still considered experimental.
How complicated is the operation?
So in a standard hysterectomy, you really take the uterus very close to the organ and you leave all the major blood vessels behind. But for a transplant, you need those blood vessels. So you need to really take out the organ with its associated blood vessels and other tissue. And that dissection is around some complex organs like the bladder and the ureters, which is the tube that goes between the kidney and the bladder. And you have to dissect them right out to make sure you protect them in a live donor, but still are able to take out the veins and the arteries.
Thomas, 11 years ago, you had a workplace accident. What happened?
It was about 6 in the morning. It had just snowed outside, and people tracking in snow on the ramp. Next thing you know, there was a sheet of ice on the ramp, and I'm going down. And I'm not sure exactly how or what, but I ended up sliding. My feet hit the axle, sent this two-wheeler up in the air. Two-wheeler came down and decided to hit me right between the legs. Bingo. I jumped up real quick and ran into the men's room, took a good look at myself. I was cut, and I was bleeding, and I cleaned myself up. But no, I didn't realize at the time how severe my injury was.
What did you learn when you eventually went to the hospital?
There was a crushing injury down here, and they had to put some kind of structure to hold everything up. They scheduled an appointment for surgery around 3 weeks down the road. They wanted me to see the surgeon. I hadn't met him yet. I remember this, when I first met him, it was like, hello, how you doing? And 5 minutes later, he points at me and he says, you got cancer, just like that. You got cancer.
The surgeon fixing your injured groin discovered you had a rare penile cancer. What happened next?
I knew before we got the diagnosis that they were going to have to amputate. It was obvious.
You lived without a penis for more than 4 years. What was that like?
I guess it cramped my dating style, I guess. You know, I wasn't going on too many dates, you know. Can't go online or whatever and say, hey, yeah, no, you're looking for a guy without a penis, well, then I'm your guy.
How did doctors respond back then when you asked for a penis transplant?
Dr. Feldman thought I was crazy, and it probably was. Every time he saw me, when I woke up out of the surgery, I turned around, and one of the first words I said to him was like, okay, now we're going to start thinking about the transplant, right? He says, they don't do that stuff.
Curtis, you're a plastic and reconstructive surgeon. How complicated is the procedure to transplant a penis?
It's a very delicate procedure that you use microsurgical techniques where you're operating under a microscope to put all the fine structures together and make sure that they function. So it was a long case, but it went well, and it certainly was within the purview of what we're able to do with modern microsurgical technique.
Peter, your team at St Vincent's Hospital in Sydney pioneered the heart in a box. What is that?
So the heart in the box enables us to do a heart transplant from donors that we wouldn't be able to use without this technology. Someone else has to die before someone can have a heart transplant. That's a sad reality. The problem for the heart is that it's once you withdraw all the life supports, you're subjecting the heart almost to a global heart attack. And for many years it was thought these hearts were not recoverable. But we thought the heart in this situation is a bit like the kidney, the liver, the lungs, which are all being recovered from these donors. They've stopped working, but we thought if you can retrieve the heart within a certain period of time, these hearts, at least some of them, will recover. But what we needed was a mechanism to recover these hearts on a machine to know that this heart will work. So we did the research at the Victor Chang Cardiac Research Institute. We developed a special flush solution to protect the heart after it's stopped. We then take donor blood, add it to the machine. We then take the heart, add that to the machine. We reoxygenate the blood on the machine, perfuse it through the heart, and the heart starts beating. And once the heart starts beating, then we can make a judgment whether this heart will recover to a point where it can be transplanted. So we did this all in the laboratory, and by 2014 we were sure that this would work clinically, and that's when we did our first clinical case.
Peter, how has the use of DCD hearts revolutionised cardiac transplantation?
So it now accounts for a third of the heart transplants that we do at St Vincent's. Globally at the moment there's about 8,000 heart transplants performed per year. We think that DCD could add 2,000 heart transplants a year to that number.
Alan, you were one of the world's first patients to receive one of these DCD hearts. How was your health before that?
Oh, actually in rapid decline. I had dilated cardiomyopathy, and it's basically enlarged heart, and the efficiency just gets less and less, and it got down to about 10%. I had defibrillators in. I had 3 over probably the last 15 years, and every time the heart went into a funny rhythm, the ventricle would just stop working. I'd just collapse. Wow. And the defib would go off, bring you back. So I had a sort of an existence where every time you got to a major road or something like that, you wanted to cross, say, Parramatta Road, you think this is 3 lanes of traffic. Am I going to collapse halfway across? Mm-hmm. Or one time I just about put my bags onto the luggage in an airport and just collapsed and went off to a hospital. So it was a very, a bit of a frightening existence, really.
What was your prognosis pre-transplant?
I had one of the registrars say to me that, you know, this is after an episode, you know, we just got to get the heart out of you. And I got the impression that it'd probably go through to the end of the week or maybe early the following week. In the year leading up, I actually had a major episode on Easter Friday, then I had one on Anzac Day, and then I had a couple of major ones in July where, you know, completely out to it. And then the heart came the 2nd of August. So, yeah, it was fairly close, yeah.
Peter, what about the survival rates of a DCD recipient as opposed to a conventional heart transplant?
Based on our own experience, it's the same.
Right.
They have excellent outcomes.
Linda, in 2014, you saw a story about the Heart in a Box breakthrough. What did you make of that news?
Earlier that day, I was out at my son's grave and I prayed that something good would come out of the terrible, devastating, you know, death of our son. And I saw this report on breakthrough heart transplant, which obviously got my attention. I thought about it more and more and I thought, this fellow probably has got our son's heart. I did a little bit more research and found out the fellow on this news program received his heart 2.5 weeks earlier on the exact same day that our son passed, and we donated his organs.
Peter, your 26-year-old son, Bill, had tragically died 2.5 weeks before. What happened?
Bill was with us up in the Brindabella Mountains behind Canberra. He was an electrician by trade and he was wiring up a cabin of a friend. He was to leave and he jumped in his car. He said, "See you later, Dad," and jumped in his car and started driving away. I went to my car and just got on the two-way radio and I said, "See you later, Bill, have a safe trip." And he said, "Thanks, Dad." And I said, "Bill, I love you, mate." And he said, "I love you too, Dad, and tell Mum I love her as well." And off he went. He drove down to the coast, down to Narooma. From there, it was the next morning we got a phone call, or a man came to the door knocking on the cabin door saying, "You've got to go home, something's happened." And we found, we were told that Bill had an accident off a skateboard and it wasn't good. And we were to get home straight away. We went straight to the Canberra hospital and went up to the ICU, and most of the family were there already. What happened is Bill was out skating with a friend. It was on a longboard, not in a skate park. He was just in a car park area down at Narooma. He came off the skateboard. No one witnessed it. No one actually saw it happen. His friend was ahead of him. His friend turned around and came back to look for Bill because he wasn't behind him and he was lying on the road. Obviously, he had come off and hit the back of his head. They called an ambulance. They rushed him to Moruya Hospital. We have spoken to the AMBOs since, and they said that his eyes were fixed and dilated before they got to Moruya Hospital. He was airlifted from Moruya Hospital to Canberra Hospital, and when we arrived at the hospital from up in the hills, He was in surgery getting the top of his skull removed to help alleviate the bleeding around the brain. The doctor said that that may help, but it didn't help. It was all too late.
Linda, Bill wasn't on the donor register. Why did you decide to donate his organs?
Well, he really was a generous person, and we knew that he didn't need them anymore. Like, we could have sent Bill to the grave with his organs intact, or we sent him to the grave and he's helping someone else. So it sort of seemed, it made sense to make that decision.
Which of Bill's organs were donated?
So obviously his heart, his lungs, his liver, one kidney, and the other kidney with the pancreas, and also the corneas of his eyes. Yeah.
Thomas, in 2016 you received the first penis transplant in the US. How did you feel when you woke up?
You're born as a male, you have a penis. Next thing you know, you don't have a penis. I wasn't the same guy. 4 years later, you got another penis. It sounds like, I don't know, sounds like almost like a horror movie, I guess. But it worked.
Curtis, how did you judge the success of Thomas's operation?
The three goals that we had for the operation were, aesthetically acceptable genitourinary tissue, and the second one was urinary function, which was really a debilitating situation for Tom. And then we had this sort of uncharted waters, but sexual function was our last goal, and it took a little longer than we thought, but it's been a pretty miraculous recovery in that regard.
Thomas, do you feel different with someone else's penis, an appendage which is visible on your body?
The only way I could explain it to you is it's mine. And I always felt it's mine.
How do others react when they learn that you've got a transplanted penis?
Oh boy, it's every kind of look that you can imagine. Men, they give you like a look like, thank God it was you and not me.
And what about women? How do they react?
Some of the reaction was, I say to myself sometimes, boy, I wish I was 25. I'd take advantage of some of these reactions, but I'm an old man, so my time is past. Some of them are shocked. Some of them are just they question, am I different, or the person that donated their penis? Am I in better shape now than I was before? I mean, all kinds of crazy reactions.
Peter Walsh is Australia's first hand transplant recipient. He welcomed Insight cameras into his home.
I'm Peter Walsh. I live at Cobden and I've been here all my life. I like cricket. Sometimes keeps me busy with the cricket pitch. When I'm watering it and that and rolling it, I go over there every day. Yeah, every day in the summer. I was a plumber for 45 years. You've got to have two hands to be a plumber. But I miss work the most.
He was a workaholic. Work, work, work. Everything just stopped. When he got sick, he got septicemia, pneumococcal.
They told me that you're going to lose your hands and legs. Well, I was thinking your limbs will fall off when they die. They just went blacker and blacker, then they cut them off then.
Other hand in. Well, for 5 years he had no hands and we had to do everything for him. There was virtually nothing he could do. The doctor said to Peter, how about a hand transplant? It took 17 hours. They had to take his hand off and rejoin everything all together. Veins and nerves and unbelievable. The doctors are not God, but they're close to it.
From day one it was my hand. I was white and this was a bit brown. Yeah, but it was a good fit. It's pretty good. Not as good as when I was born with it, but damn near it. I can do most things with it, and now I'll play bowls. On a Tuesday, I've got to use a long stick and I use two hands. I was so happy that the family gave the hand. You know, it's not an organism, it's not a heart, it's not a lung or anything, but
It's a matter of life and death for some people to have these transplants, and it isn't for him, but it's his independence.
it's been very handy for me. And I don't know how life would be without it.
We filmed with Peter before COVID. He was unable to join us in the studio tonight. Hearing what he had to say about all transplants not necessarily being life-saving, but all being life-changing, Lolita, does that resonate with you?
Yes. And it was life-saving for me too, because I was dying. I was ashamed, the feelings that I had and about myself, and I have done something wrong to be born like this. So for me, I needed the chance to feel like a woman, to feel like you or the girl next door.
Rebecca, 6 weeks ago, you performed Australia's first uterine transplant. Who was the recipient?
We have her right here.
And who was the donor?
And right next to me again.
Michelle. Kirsty, you're the first person to have a uterine transplant done in Australia. How does that feel?
I'm feeling great. It's been ups and downs the last 6 weeks, but everything's going well, and I've had my first period. So yeah, the team was very excited. I was very excited.
Michelle, you're 54, you're a grandmother. Why did you agree to do this for your daughter?
I suppose as a mother, you do anything for your children, and I really knew how much Kirsty wanted to carry another baby. I had no problems whatsoever.
Mayanna, you're an independent ethicist involved with Rebecca's trial. What did you think initially about uterus transplants?
Yeah, well, when I first started working in the ethics of uterus transplantation, it was more than 10 years ago, and it's fair to say I did come to it with some reservations and some concerns. I had a lot of questions, obvious questions, natural questions, understandable questions around the safety and the risks involved and the use of medical resources and so on. I was also quite concerned, or had questions, as many bioethicists do, around the social stigma attaching to infertility and the way in which that stigma can give rise to wider social pressures on women and their partners to be able to conceive and experience pregnancy and have their own biologically related children. But over time, with my research and also talking to other ethicists and uterus transplant surgeons around the world, and then coming to know Beck and her team, and I became increasingly assured that there were ways to do this not just safely or as safely as possible, but also in ways that were fully cognizant and sensitive to the potential risks, both medical and psychosocial and emotional.
Lolita, there are other options to have a baby. Why did you want a uterus transplant?
First, the main reason is because I always wanted to be pregnant. Even when I was a young child, when I was playing with dolls and all that. Pregnant women is so beautiful. So for me, it was important to be able to carry my own child. And then when I was 14, I had this answer from a doctor. I called the adoption center in Sweden, and I was 14. I took that information and twisted, and it wasn't for me. I wanted to carry my own.
Kirsty, what about you? Did you ever consider adoption or surrogacy?
Carrying a baby doesn't make me any more of a parent or a mother, but I knew that I wanted to be pregnant again and that I wanted to carry another baby. We did look into our other options. We looked at fostering, we looked at adoption, and we looked at surrogacy. I had multiple offers.
Mayanna, are there ethical questions to consider about life-changing versus life-saving transplant?
I think there are. It's a really important and significant distinction. Obviously, when we're talking about life-saving transplants, immediately the question of taking the risks and the need for them is comparatively easy to justify. It's easy for everyone to understand. And when we then shift to something like a life-enhancing or quality of life transplant, as they're also known, the question immediately arises for people, is there a medical need for this? And it's fair to say that amongst ethicists, this is a contested question, in fact, whether there is or isn't a need to have fertility treatment. Some ethicists argue that it is a need because there's a departure, whether that's due to disease or whatever the history of it is, there's a departure from normal human species functioning, as they talk about it. And so some ethicists are happy to say that there's a medical need here for a treatment like uterus transplantation, even though it isn't life-saving. Other ethicists say that, because of the stigmas of infertility and the like, that these are, that being infertile is, if it's any harm at all, it's a social harm, and that what we need to do is direct our attention to addressing the social conditions that give rise to the very real suffering, the psycho-emotional suffering, the stigma and the pressures that many people feel themselves to be under. But I think it's really interesting to note that whether we decide that something is medical need or not doesn't settle the question of whether we should treat that condition or provide treatment for it.
What issues can arise when dealing with a living donor?
It does depend a bit which kind of living donor we're talking about, because there are what are known as living known donors and living non-known, or directed donors and non-directed donors. But if we just think about the known living donor as the scenarios that we're talking about here, sisters, mothers, daughters, godmothers, whatever the scenario might be. The first is establishing whether for the donor in particular, whether the desire to help, the motivation is really authentic, because we want to be sure that they don't feel coerced or pressured in any way as a result of knowing their potential recipient. Here we're talking about a donor who's healthy, who doesn't have any medically indicated need for, a 10 or 12-hour surgery, and for whom there might be impacts on bladder and those sorts of things. But they also need to be really informed and really thinking carefully over a period of time about the potential psycho-emotional risks. It's great if it all works well and they see their loved one realise their reproductive dream and aspiration, but they have to really think seriously what happens if the transplant doesn't work.
Lolita, it was a big operation, particularly for your donor, your sister Linda. Yeah. Did that worry you?
No, because we trusted the Mats Brännström so much, and he was very carefully. He was explaining everything. It's a risk. It's just a project. You're first out, and you had a psychology who talked to you, and I had a psychology. We had so many people around us.
Linda, you had 12 hours of surgery to remove your uterus. Did you consider the risks beforehand?
If I was feeling guilt that I had been giving birth, I had said when, like 20 years earlier, I would give my womb to my sister, and if I felt like I had to do it, but that was not the case. Lolita and I, she always took my sweatshirts when I'm 4 years older than her. She took my shoes, she took my trousers, everything. So it's like I don't need my uterus anymore. So it was like, oh.
You can take that too.
You can take that too, yeah.
Did you have any post-operative complications?
It was hard for me. I had 4 small children. I was 37 when I donated. So it was hard, but I will do it all over again.
Michelle, it's now 6 weeks since your uterus was removed and transplanted into your daughter Kirsty. How are you feeling?
I'm good. I had a few bumps in the road, so I've had a couple of infections, but definitely getting stronger every day, and the same, even everything that I know now, would I still have done it? Yes, definitely.
Kirsty, were you worried about your mother donating her womb to you, given the risks?
Yes, yep. Mum's surgery was going to be a long one, and we were prepared for that. The morning of the surgery, we got up and Mum had a shower and we had a cuddle, and I walked her into theatre, and I was petrified. I was not about my surgery. I was excited. I had anticipation. Couldn't wait to jump in that bed and be wheeled down. But I knew it was going to be a long day, and I don't think I felt good until I woke up at midnight and I looked over, and Mum and I were recovering in a room together, and she gave me a thumbs up. And I was like, gave her a thumbs up, and then we closed our eyes and we went back to sleep.
Alan, you had a life-saving heart transplant in 2018. Did you have any complications?
You know, all transplant people have some complications. I did go into rejection for a little while, and St Vincent's Hospital, you know, they sorted that out quite well. I'm fine, I'm healthy, and I'm very thankful for everything that happened. And, you know, would I do it again? I think I'm too old to do it again, but it, you know, it comes with its own trauma and everything, but it's, you know, the whole thing's a miracle.
In Australia, donors are anonymous by law. Peter, you received a life-saving double lung transplant 8.5 years ago. Did you want to know who the donor was?
Certainly. Finding out who my donor was a priority with me.
Linda and Peter, your son Bill died in a skateboarding accident in 2014. Did you want to meet his organ recipients?
Yes. Well, initially, all you want to know is the recipient is happy and healthy, whether they're doing well and living life, whether the gift that you provided them has worked. That's what you want to know. You just want to hear from them to know they're okay. And also you want to hear a thank you, because the gift you've given them is life, and we would like to meet. If we did, that was the cherry on top, just to see them face to face.
Linda, how did you work out who has Bill's lungs?
Okay, I was looking at a Facebook site. There was a lady there asked the question of other recipients, you know, have you written a letter to say thank you to your donor family? And so I just scrolled through all the answers, and I came across a fellow who had replied and said, yes, I had a double lung transplant just over a year ago, and I've written a letter to say thank you, and I've received a letter from them. We then compared our letters to realise that we'd had the right person, we were the right people.
And who was that person?
Peter here.
Just over a year after your son Bill died, you met Peter, the recipient of Bill's lungs.
Yes.
How was that for you, meeting him?
Very exciting. Very emotional, very exciting.
Peter, what about you? What was that moment like?
The emotion, it's hard to describe. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry or get angry. The whole myriad of emotions was bubbling up. But all I could do, I think, was hold his hand and look in his eyes and think, my son saved your life. And I was happy for him that he had a second chance at life. Our son didn't have that second chance, but our son gave 5 people a second chance at life. So it was exciting and it was very helpful to the grieving process.
Peter, what was it like for you?
It's just amazing, you know, when I met my donor family. It's just amazing.
After the transplant, did you feel any different?
Well, after the transplant, I had grief, and I didn't know why I was having grief, but I was having grief, and that went on for a few years. And but also, I was having feelings about horses.
Horses?
Horses.
Were you interested in horses?
I hate them.
Oh, right.
I fall off them, break my arm and all that sort of thing. I don't really get along with them. But I had these feelings for horses. While I was in hospital, my daughter had our first grandson, and his name was Logan. They named him Logan. And I've met the donor family. They've got a horse, and their horse is called Logan.
So Linda and Peter, what did you make of Peter's thoughts about having these thoughts about horses post-transplant?
I didn't know what to make of it, to tell you the truth. I know that traits being taken on by the recipients is documented, especially the heart. So it wasn't a total surprise when he said something, but it was sort of special that maybe some of the traits of our son was living on in someone else.
Did Bill like horses?
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Yeah, he had a horse called Logan. He and his wife had a horse.
My name is Marie. After giving birth at 31 weeks, I had an emergency heart transplant. The doctor decided that it was not safe for me or the baby. So they needed the emergency C-section right away. I was only going to have weeks to live. And there was no time to think. I just said yes. Never in my wildest dream that I would ever have a transplant. Oh! When I woke up from coma, I couldn't move any of my fingers, any of my limbs. I had to relearn how to walk again. Faith really was my motivation. After the transplant, the massive difference is that I can run with Faith and play with her and not be so tired. That's the major thing for me, is that you get to see her grow up. I think about the donor a lot. I try to also kind of get Faith to understand. I want her to appreciate that I'm alive because of that donor. I cry sometimes because the reality with transplant patient is that you get to live, but somebody has to lose their life to get, your life-saving treatment. So it's bittersweet.
Peter, you were dying of a lung disease when you received a life-saving transplant. Was there ever that sense of guilt for you about surviving when your donor didn't?
I suffered a fair bit of guilt. I had to go and see a counsellor for the next 7 years after that to get it squared away in my head what had actually happened, and come to grips with it.
Linda and Peter received your son's lungs. What do you say to him when he's feeling down?
Peter has called once or twice, feeling really down, feeling this survivor guilt. We just assure him that Bill couldn't use the lungs anymore. He wasn't going to use his lungs anymore. It wasn't his fault that Peter was living. Whether Bill went to the grave with the lungs or he went to the grave without his lungs, it wasn't Pete's fault. That we were happy for him to be living and having a healthy life. We were happy for Pete to keep living and have his family around him. So his family got to keep their loved one. We just assure him of that, and that helped. Oh, hopefully it's helped.
Oh, it certainly has.
Curtis, you pioneered penile transplants in the US alongside your patient Thomas. Has it all been smooth sailing?
Not smooth sailing at all. There have been many challenges, and fortunately he's weathered them well. This guy's pretty rugged, but there are medical complications that are associated with these procedures and can't be ignored when you're talking about the risks of them.
Thomas, what challenges have you had post-transplant?
These drugs knock your kidneys for a loop. It's not uncommon to infect your kidneys with these meds. A year out, I ended up, one of the kidneys was affected, and it kicked out a kidney stone, and the kidney stone was infected. But this particular night, I took my mom out for dinner, and we came home, and one of the drugs that they give you, anti-rejection drugs, is Program, and it makes you shake. And I was shaking pretty bad, so I went to bed early. My mom says she heard me crying in my bed. She comes into my room, tries to wake me up, and I'm out cold. 2 weeks later, I wake up in the Mass General Hospital in the ICU ward. I guess I was in a coma for a couple of weeks. My legs didn't work, but the doctors did a good job. The doctors at this hospital here kept me alive. That was a life and death situation.
Thomas, your penis transplant is considered experimental. Was it worth it?
You better believe it. Oh yeah. Maybe once or twice in your whole lifetime, you have to make a decision, one way or the other. You can just accept things, but if you don't like what's going on, you're going to have to decide to make a change. Yeah, live with it or not live with it.
Alan, you were one of the first patients to receive a heart donated after circulatory death. What do you think of the breakthrough that saved you?
I don't know. I've gone from not being able to do anything, just lying in the bed to, what I am now. What it has done for me is made me a great believer in just pay it forward. So wherever, as my wife and myself, wherever we can help someone, or if we've got money to donate, we do. That's my way of repaying.
Peter, so far in Australia, 85 people, including Alan, have been saved by DCD heart transplants. What's the next frontier in transplantation for you?
I've been very fortunate to be working with a venom toxicologist, and he's extracted a protein from funnel web spider venom. We've been testing that in models of donor heart preservation. It's at the laboratory stage at the moment, but we think that we'll be able to start first in man studies, probably in 2024. But we think this protein has much broader application than transplantation. We think this is something that one day might be given to ambulance officers who are first responders. If someone's having a stroke, having a heart attack, having a collapse in the street, they could administer this drug as a drug, get them to the hospital, and then restore the circulation to the brain or the heart or that organ.
Rebecca, you're trialling uterine transplants in Australia, and Kirsty has just had the first one. Where to from here?
So we're hoping to finish our trial. At the moment, we've got ethics approval to do 6, and we're going to do a combination of transplant surgeries from living and deceased donors. Obviously, the deceased donors, there's less ethical issues, as was alluded to, although not no ethical issues, because you've got all the issues about someone passing away for that gift to go to someone else. But you have a longer ischemic time, so the time that the organ has no blood circulation, and that then can have an impact on the success of that transplant. So we'll finish our initial experiments, and then we're going to look at how long the uterus can survive without its circulation.
Is there a time limit on how long a transplanted uterus can remain in the body?
There's not, but for our trial we've got a limit of 5 years, or after 2 live births, because of the issues with the immunosuppression medication.
Kirsty, you received a transplanted womb donated by your mum, Michelle. With that time limit you hear about, 5 years potentially, does that feel like pressure to try and have a baby in that time?
No, not at all. 5 years seems like a very long time. I'm just taking one day at a time at the moment.
You have a baby girl?
I do.
Why is it important to you to bear more children?
I have a brother, and we had a wonderful childhood, and growing up I always begged my mum for a sister. And now that I've had a child, I would like her to have a sibling.
Michelle, you've been unwell since the surgery. Was it worth it?
Oh, definitely. Definitely.
Linda, you donated your womb to your sister Lolita after having 4 children of your own. How do you feel now about that gift?
I often get the question if I feel like a less woman now because I have no uterus. And I always answer that I feel like more of a woman now because I have given my sister a gift. And I have given my daughter a gift because she is born with the same syndrome as my sister.
And your other sister has made a promise too. What is that?
When we entered the trial for the experiment, we did some exams for my daughter, and we don't have the same blood type, so I can't donate to my daughter. But our younger sister has the same blood type as my daughter, so she said, "Oh, when I'm done, she can have mine."
So your younger sister will donate her uterus to your daughter?
Possible.
Lolita, you've now had that transplanted uterus removed. Do you have any children?
Yeah, I have a son.
You have a son?
Yeah, and he's 7, he's turning 8 this year.
And this was after IVF rounds?
Yeah, we have to do the IVF before the transplant. So we had the embryo in the freezer first. And then we had to wait a year after the first period.
What was it like being pregnant?
Unreal. I have a baby in my stomach. I feel the kicks. I'm pregnant.
Your son, Cash Douglas, was born in 2015. What's he like?
He has a heart of gold. He's fun, he's stubborn, he's wise, he's so smart. He's nosy, and he's so caring of everybody else. The last thing he says when he falls asleep is like, Mom, I will love you forever.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much to you all for being here, for sharing your stories. That's all we have time for tonight. Thank you too for joining us. I'll see you next week.